Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, great. I really enjoyed my day. You have a beautiful campus. It's been a great visit. The title of this talk is Skin Color, Global Media, and the Shifting Politics of Feminism. But it's really should be everything in the kitchen sink, because there's a lot of things I want to talk about. I want to talk about the things that John wants me to talk about. I want to talk about the things that I want to throw in that I also think are interesting. So I hope you'll kind of bear with me as I go through some of these points that I think will actually come together by the end. Let me just say a little bit about my own interest in this topic and my own background in relation to this topic. Most of my research is on the politics of skin tone among women of color in the United States. So I'm a sociologist, and I'm very interested in how lightness or darkness of skin tone affects outcomes for women. I myself am biracial, black and white, so I've always paid attention to these kinds of things in my own life and in the communities I've been a part of. My book called Race, Gender, and the Politics of Skin Tone compares the experiences of black women and Mexican American women. I'm going to share a little bit of data from that, but I'm also going to talk about other people's research in this area. Because of my interest in skin tone, and because I lived in Southern California for many years, I had a sort of natural shift over to issues of cosmetic surgery. So I'm going to talk also about the politics of cosmetic surgery and how all of these things are related to global media patterns. So I'm going to start off just sharing some old sayings to kind of give us some context here. Many of you may have recognized these from jump rope songs or from family sayings. If you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, stick around. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're black, get back. Light, bright, and almost white. Blue, black. African. La güera, la prieta, la morena, India, la negrita, color struck. Most of the sayings that we can come up with about color denigrate darkness and elevate lightness. There is one exception I've come up with so far, only one, and that is the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. And that's supposed to, of course, mean the darker the skin, the better the person is on the inside. But I think it's notable that of all the sayings about color that we could come up with, one, or very few, have a positive meaning for dark skin. And I'm going to talk about the implications of those kind of ideologies in the US and abroad. So let me just kind of give some shared definitions. I'm going to be talking about colorism, and I want to explain what I mean by that. Colorism is a system that privileges light skin and Anglo-facial features. It's directly connected to racism. It can't exist without a larger structure of white racism, and it won't go away until white racism goes away. So I don't want you to think that I think it's something different. I see them as completely connected. The way that colorism manifests in the United States is that lighter-skinned people of color enjoy substantial privileges, many of which I'll talk about in the next few slides, that make them have quite different experiences than darker-skinned people that are like them in other ways. Okay. And the third important point here for me is that colorism is not just an in-group problem. It's not, for example, a problem of the black community that we all ought to be embarrassed about. Colorism is a systemic issue. It's a structural problem like racism. And that means that people of color respond to color cues, but so do whites. And part of the reason that we know that is because we see differences in outcomes for people by color in things like employment and education. So it's more than just an in-group phenomenon. Okay? You with me so far? Questions so far? Okay. Feel free to interrupt me as we go. I'm happy to answer questions, make other comments, and that kind of thing. I don't only study women, but I do often study women, and I want to talk about why I think that's really important. One of the aspects of women's experience that has become increasingly important is this concept of beauty. And the reason that it's important is because beauty is sort of like a form of capital. And the more one has, the more they can get of other kinds of things. And so what we're seeing is that women invest in their beauty, for example, with skin lightening creams, with cosmetic surgeries, with hair straightening, with all kinds of things. They invest in their beauty expecting a payoff for that investment, which they actually get. So beauty is an important concept in trying to understand how women operate in a global marketplace of jobs, marriage partners, etc. In this way, it's a form of capital. I've talked about it in my own work as a form of social capital, and other people have talked about it also as a form of symbolic capital, so something that could be transformed into something else or a way of connecting to other people. And then much of what I'll be talking about in the second half of my talk today is cosmetic surgery and skin lightening creams and products. And that these two things are increasingly used to transform women's bodies in a marketplace kind of framework. Okay, so I want to just touch on some of the quantitative research, some of which is mine, some of which is other people's, to give you a sense, at least from a sociological perspective, of how skin color matters, okay? So if you have light skin, you gain the following kinds of material advantages. One, higher incomes. Now, it's important to clarify that this is true even when other background variables are accounted for. So even when we're looking at people who have similar family backgrounds, similar levels of education, reside in similar places in the United States, like urban versus rural, we still see an effect of skin tone providing higher incomes to light-skinned women. So essentially, light-skinned women, let's say, I'll give you an example, light-skinned black women in the United States earn about $6,000 more a year than darker-skinned black women. So it's a pretty big chunk of change, so to speak. So it's a significant difference. In addition, light-skinned people have more years of educational attainment than darker-skinned people, again, who are similar in other ways. So middle-class families living in urban areas with similar levels of parental education. The light-skinned people complete more years of education. So I interpret this, and so do most scholars in this area, as discrimination effects. So there's an ongoing process of discrimination. There may be a historical legacy of discrimination also, but there's still a contemporary kind of process at work. In my own work, I've even found that in the black community, lighter-skinned women marry spouses of higher status than darker-skinned women do. Now, there's a lot of kind of anecdotal talk about, oh, if a black man makes a lot of money, he marries a white woman, and people always have movie star examples and stuff. Well, that may or may not be true, but certainly what we see is that women who are light-skinned have a benefit, quote unquote, in the marriage market of marrying spouses who have higher status. So this is going to be important later in the talk when I talk about skin lightening creams. There's been some interesting research on blacks and Latinos in the United States and about where they live. And we find that lighter-skinned blacks and Latinos live in more integrated neighborhoods than darker-skinned blacks and Latinos. So you could see at all these different levels of measurement, light skin is still providing benefit. So there's this clearly, I think, ongoing system of discrimination. Whoops, wrong way. The criminal justice system, of course, is ripe with all kinds of racial discrimination, but even colorism is even at work there. So the controlling image of the dark-skinned black man who's a criminal is also at work in sentencing, so that lighter-skinned men get lighter sentences for similar kinds of crimes than darker-skinned men. We're talking within one group. Okay. And lastly, There's been a growing amount of research on mental health outcomes and skin tone, and what we're seeing is that lighter-skinned people suffer from less depression than darker-skinned people, have higher levels of self-esteem, self-efficacy, etc. So there's material kinds of advantages to light skin and material discrimination against darker-skinned people, but then there's also mental health or social psychological outcomes to this as well. So it sort of crosses the board in the ways that it matters. Please come in. There's some chairs in the front. Whoops. I want to try to make sense a little bit about how skin tone matters in employment and in education. So I'm going to offer some mechanisms that I think might be at work. One way is that lighter-skinned people seem to have increased access to certain kinds of social networks. So, for example, if you think about the black community and organizations like Jack and Jill, for example, which is a sort of black middle class or upper middle class organization that has its own social networks, elite social networks. So light-skinned people are more likely to have access to these kinds of social networks, and of course, that's the most important thing in employment in the United States. In addition, I'm going to argue that employers, both white and people of color, draw on long-standing racial ideologies to make judgments about intelligence, competency, civility, etc. So that old ideologies that are still with us today, like associating dark skin with dangerousness, with barbarism, associating white skin with civility and virtuousness, but those things are with us still in some ways. So that people look for racial cues of competency. So they see a light-skinned person and think, that person seems smart, right? Now we see these kinds of effects with physical attractiveness in general, and these are called halo effects. So that people who are judged as physically attractive, they get all kinds of other positive attributes, like they're more likely to be thought of as smart, as nice, as kind, as competent, etc. And so skin color, because it's connected to the idea of physical attractiveness, has similar kind of effect. This is another important thing, particularly when we're talking about white employers and black or Latino job seekers, for example. And that is that whites will be more likely to assume that a light-skinned black or Latino person is more like them and more assimilated, in a sense, than a dark-skinned person. So dark-skinned people on similar levels of education report higher levels of discrimination than light-skinned. And the employers may not always be right, but there's an assumption that that person seems more like me, or I'm more comfortable with them. And those kinds of judgments and assumptions about assimilationist attitudes are an important factor in employment-seeking behavior. Oops, I always go the wrong way, sorry. Oops. And the last one is the role, again, of beauty, thinking about gender and beauty, and the kinds of jobs where beauty matters. Now, I think what's becoming true in the United States is that beauty is starting to matter for all kinds of jobs, even where it doesn't really matter, because beauty matters so much for women in general in the way that they're assessed. But jobs like receptionist, hostess at a restaurant, these kind of sort of front office appearance jobs where the person is the representative of the organization, those kinds of jobs are increasingly important in terms of beauty. And because skin tone is so closely connected to perceptions of beauty, it's another way that this employment discrimination takes place. Following me so far? Okay. The other one that I want to talk about is schools. And I think that, because we see this significant gap in schooling differences, it's worthwhile, I think, to think through what could be happening at schools. And I think there are a few things at work here. One is teacher expectations. And again, going back to that idea that we still draw on old racial ideologies about body types and skin colors and associating them with intelligence, rationality, civility, etc., that teachers have certain kinds of expectations for their students. That teachers are more likely to send dark-skinned students to the principal's office for being disruptive than they are light-skinned students, for example. They're more likely to think that the light-skinned student is cute and nice and well-behaved. And these are important things as they translate in terms of the way they translate into learning outcomes and classroom behavior. So I think teacher expectations are part of what we're seeing. Also, for some light-skinned people, some of them have a white parent. And when we're talking about parental advocacy at the school, this could be a very important distinction. So you may have a room full of black children, but some of those black children have a white parent. Some of them are mixed. And when a white parent comes in to advocate for their student, that's a different situation than when a black parent comes in to advocate for his or her student. And so who the parent is and their ability to advocate and the way that they're received by the teacher, the principal, etc., is another dimension of discrimination. We can all think back to who was voted homecoming queen, who was class president, who was, the cutest couple, or all those kinds of things. All the ways that peers socialize us in terms of beauty and status. These are very important things, and these are lessons not lost, I think, on any of us when we reflect on our own schooling. So peer status hierarchies also affect what's happening in schools. Who is the butt of jokes? Who is the girl everyone wants to touch her hair, for example? Okay, these kinds of things. And lastly, I would say something about the curriculum. And this, of course, is where a lot of activism around multicultural curriculum is at work. So who's reflected back to students in the curriculum? Who are they reading about? Who do they see pictures of in their history book? So this is another way that the tone of schooling is set for students. And so I think at this point in the United States, we're pretty clear that students of various racial and ethnic backgrounds need to be reflected in the curriculum. But who are those people? Are they all, do they represent the group at large? Do they tend to be mixed or light-skinned or whatever? So these are all part of the picture, I think, in understanding how colorism seeps into employment and schooling. Okay, now I want to share with you, now that I've kind of given this background quantitative picture, I want to share with you a few quotes from some of the women that I interviewed because I think that they help explain the experience of colorism in a more intimate way. So I'm going to just share a few quotes. Oh, I'm supposed to summarize basically what they're going to say. The women that I talked to 25 women as part of this project that I'm mentioning. And many of them described feeling like light skin was highly valued in their community. These are black and Mexican American women. That light skin was highly valued and that it was sort of prized in a way. That when babies were born, people were quick to assess how the baby looks. Oh, que blanco, so white and pretty. Or, oh, such good hair, or whatever, okay? So that whiteness and white-like features were really important. Similarly, they said pretty consistently that they felt like dark skin was denigrated, it was belittled, and that it was associated with Africanness or Indianness in a negative way. Okay, so that to be called African or to be called Indian or India was pejorative. Okay? And the quotes I'm going to share are from women, and the women describe the bulk of their socialization around color happening through family, community, and media. And I'm going to take up the media part in a few more minutes. Okay. This is a quote from a black woman, and she says, "Both my parents are dark-skinned black, too." She is also. "And they wanted me to have the whole black pride thing. We never considered skin bleaching or anything like that. We just dealt with it. It hurts when you're younger because you're the butt of jokes. For the longest time, you feel like you're just so ugly. I was dark-skinned, tall, and skinny, and that was a bad combination. I was really quiet. I would relax around my friends, but I was quiet." I picked this quote because to share because I think it shows, well, one, the potential painfulness for some people of having dark skin in a peer group that is really denigrating of that. But two, the way that it affected her personality as well. She went inward. And it's not, she's reflecting back, of course, on her childhood. She's an adult now. And her adult life is quite different. I wouldn't describe her as an introvert. But she really felt like much of her childhood was punctuated by her dark skin and by being the odd one out in peer groups. This is from a light-skinned Mexican-American woman. She says, "My cousin's hair came out really light, so she looks Anglo, except for her features, her facial features. But her skin color, eyes, and hair look Anglo. Even when we were little, I remember they used to say to her, 'Hola, güera.' I think they used to think of her as prettier than all my other cousins because she was lighter. I tended to stick to my other cousin more, maybe because we were more closer in skin color. I think in a way when we were younger, we were jealous of her just because a lot of people paid attention to her and said, 'Oh, she's so cute. Look at those beautiful green eyes.'" So again, family was a big part of color socialization. And one of the things I found was that a lot of women made alliances with women who particularly darker skinned women. I wouldn't have described her as darker skinned, but again, skin tone is often relative. So in the family, she was not the lightest one, and so that's really what mattered in this context. And so people often made alliances with women that they thought looked like them in order to kind of help mediate the criticism. "Hola, güera," hi, pretty one, highlight one, was a very common saying among the Mexican-American women that I talked to. A lot of them described hearing that said to other people, occasionally hearing that themselves. But güera la güera in Spanish, if you don't know, means, it's sort of like fair in English. So it means both light-skinned and pretty, right? Because fair also means pretty. So it captures within the meaning of the word the essence of this issue. This person is responding to my question, what does it mean to look Indian? Okay? And this person is Mexican-American. And she says, to look Indian means to look dark, to have slanted eyes, high cheekbones, especially dark, especially dark. That's what gets pointed out. That's how I always grew up with it. They're always the ones with the nicknames. My brother was a really dark one in my family, and he was called the Prieto, which means the dark one. I think that's the way darker-skinned Chicanos are looked upon, to be more Indian, which is the way that Mexico looks at Indians, to be not as modern, not as sophisticated. It's just not as pretty or not as white, not as attractive. Okay? And she was saying this in a critical way, but she was describing what she sees as kind of a dominant ideology in the Mexican-American community. And I think the reason I chose this quote is because she points out the connection between the way people respond to individual skin color and broader ideologies about entire groups, in this case about indigenous people in Mexico in relation to the rest of the population. Okay. This last quote that I want to share sort of moves us into this section on cosmetic surgery. this woman is black, and she describes this interaction she has with her mom. She says, "My parents always taught me to be proud of my black skin. But when I was home recently, I was watching my mom put on her makeup, and she drew the lipstick way up in the middle of her lip. And I said, 'Why aren't you filling in your lip?' And she said, 'Well, I don't want my lips to look too big.' And I was like, this is so ironic, because you have always said the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, and be proud." And she was drawing in her lips halfway. She told this story with complete indignation that she was, sort of shocked and frustrated with her mother. But one of the reasons why this is important is because perceptions of beauty and race and racial hierarchy are not just about skin tone, but also about facial features. And that came up again and again in the interviews, as well as did the politics of hair, which would be its own talk, so I'll save that stuff for another time. So thinking about skin tone in relation to facial features is what I'm interested in doing now. For a long time, we've seen skin tone as something relatively unchangeable. And I'm going to talk about the shift in that thinking as skin lightening creams become increasingly popular. But up until the past couple of decades, we've also seen the body as something relatively unchangeable. But with the huge increase in the number of cosmetic surgeries that happen, that's something that's also changing. So hold on. We're used to thinking about cosmetic surgery, I think, in relation to gender issues. People are used to thinking about the politics of cosmetic surgery in relation to the construction of women's bodies as inadequate. Larger breasts, smaller breasts, bigger hips, smaller hips, tummy tucks, etc. And those are all important things, but I'm also going to talk today about how I think cosmetic surgery is also implicated in racial changes in people's bodies, and that people increasingly use cosmetic surgery to anglicize their bodies in particular ways through facial features and other parts. So now, Mexico has the highest level of teenage cosmetic surgery in the world. About a fourth of all the cosmetic surgery patients in Mexico are teenagers. Now, this is a phenomenon that we have here as well, and that is in certain communities, particularly among the elite in Mexico City, giving the daughter for her quinceañera, for example, a nose job, or for high school graduation. And that has been true in communities in the United States as well, particularly in more wealthy Jewish communities. It's common for a sweet 16 or high school graduation to have a nose job. So they're not out of sync, but there's higher numbers there than in other places. And so what's interesting, I think, is that what we're seeing is not just a gender phenomenon, but also a racial phenomenon. Here's a quote from a newspaper article about a young woman in Mexico. This is Luciana Ordaz Balderas. A beautiful and a rich 12-year-old girl in Mexico City told a news reporter, quote, "I hate my nose. I'd like a Britney Spears or Kirsten Dunst nose. They have more delicate features than Mexican women." So you're starting to see how global media and global images are everywhere, and that they affect girls and women in profound ways, and men in profound ways, and that the kinds of messages that they give aren't just gendered messages about women's bodies, but also about women of color's bodies and the inadequacies of women of color's bodies, and sort of constructing the body in that way as inadequate. Cosmetic surgery has had a changing clientele, and the rates of cosmetic surgeries, with one minor exception from 2004 to 2005, continue to go up every year. So more and more people get them. What we've seen, though, is huge rates of increase among people of color in the United States. So for a long time, whites were patients or customers of cosmetic surgeons. But in the past decade, essentially, people of color have used cosmetic surgery much more than in the past. So we see these huge increases among blacks, among Latinos, and among Asian Americans.
So can I just
Please.
about for 3 years? This is in a 3-year period?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, part of it is because the numbers of Latino, Asian, and African American patients were smaller, so the growth is magnified. But nonetheless, these levels of growth persisted for quite a few years thereafter. So I'm going to show you why. But in part due to marketing in the industry, it became more and more acceptable for people of color to use cosmetic surgery when in the past it was seen as something that white people did. Okay, so if we look at the top surgeries for US women, these are the top, I think I have 7, yeah, 7 cosmetic surgeries for women in the United States in order. And this is 2007 data. And interestingly, 2007 is the first year that breast augmentation has been at the top of the list. Up until this time, it's been liposuction at the top and breast augmentation second. But apparently, silicone breast implants have just been reapproved for use, and so that sort of made a spike in the number of breast augmentation procedures that have been done. So what's interesting is that there are certain, I have a laser pointer, hold on. Oh yeah, cool. There are certain procedures that you might expect to see, like breast augmentation, breast reduction, liposuction. These are things you would guess, especially when you're thinking through a gendered lens about cosmetic surgery. But there are additional things up here that I'm arguing also have a racial angle, and that is eyelid surgery and nose reshaping, okay? So that there are clear things about the face that people are having done. A lot of the eyelid surgeries are being done by Asian American women here in the United States. They have a crease put in the eyelid to look more quote-unquote Western or more white. And nose reshaping, much like I described in the case of Mexico City, the Jewish community in the United States, has also been true for blacks and Latinos to have wider noses made more narrow, okay? Now, when you look at the top surgeries, it's also possible to argue that some things that women of color are also having done, for example, breast reduction is the #1 surgery for black women. That breast reduction and tummy tucks, for example, may also be, in a sense, racializing cosmetic surgeries. That though they may not be about the face, they're about attaining a certain kind of body type that is more common among whites than among blacks, for example. So I think that even though the facial features are more obviously racial, one could argue that these other parts of the body are also racialized. What I'm suggesting is happening globally is that through increased global media, there's an argument that is suggesting we're in a new multicultural era, and that old notions of beauty as being strictly defined by white women with blonde hair and blue eyes, that's an old-fashioned thing of the past. And what you increasingly find in cosmetic surgery trade magazines, as well as beauty magazines in general, is an argument that we're in a new era of multicultural beauty, and that the new beauty is inclusive, that there are women of all backgrounds represented, and that it's an old discourse to think about white beauty as a kind of dominant trend. Newsweek did a story on this. They used Syra Mohan here, and they titled this "The Perfect Face." And they use her as an example of this new global multicultural beauty. which I think is interesting because I think in this picture, at least, she looks largely white, but she has dark hair. And in the article, one of the photographers describes her and says she's one of those models who could easily be Italian, British, or Spanish, which I read to be, she's one of those models who could easily be European, European, or European. So I think it's very interesting that the discourse is kind of tricky. On the one hand, it's telling us, oh, you know, beauty is multicultural and global and inclusive, but when we look to see what that actually looks like, it doesn't seem to be as true. I did some investigation of trade industry publications for the cosmetic surgery industry. And there's a noticeable silence around what I'm calling Anglo-conformity and the kinds of procedures that are done. So it's not like everybody gets a different kind of nose when they get a nose job. Everybody gets a very similar nose, and that is a more narrow nose, right? A nose that looks more like a typical Anglo or white nose. But that isn't said. Instead, what's written is the following. This is a quote, and this is from a publication. Facial plastic surgery was once strictly the realm of Caucasian patients, but today is a growing trend among minorities who seek to, pay attention here, enhance rather than shed their ethnicity. This is a brilliant marketing strategy because part of the concern of people of color in seeking cosmetic surgery is that they don't want to be white, right? You say, no, they're not saying I want to be white, change me. They're saying I want a little nip here, tuck there, you know, whatever, snip and then snap. Instead, the industry publication sees on this and they say, you're not becoming white. Actually, you're becoming more your true self, but we'll make your nose narrower. You following? So it's like a complete inversion. It's really fascinating. And this is widespread throughout these trade industry publications. A patient said, I don't want to be white. I just want a whiter nose. And that is real. And I'm not saying this to make fun. I'm saying this because this sentiment is real. I'm not arguing that people of color want to be white. I don't think they do. I think they want the benefits that come with Anglo facial features and light skin. They don't actually want to be white. And so the decisions to engage in these kinds of procedures are rational in that sense. We're clear that there are benefits for lighter skin, for more Anglo facial features and appearances. And so people want that. They don't necessarily want to change their ethnic identity. And the industry sees that, and so they market it in that way. I looked at medical textbooks for surgeons, for future cosmetic surgeons, and they describe the kinds of features that they will be operating on. And so these terms are from descriptions of noses and eyes, and they use the following terms. These are in medical textbooks to describe the pathology, essentially, and that is eyes that look sleepy, nose bridges that are depressed or weak, okay, here, right, this part of your nose, eyes that look dull, noses that are deficient, eyelids that are challenging, etc. So the pathology is really built into the industry, right, so that intervention is necessary because it's being created in this way through these science textbooks, okay? You with me so far? Okay, we're actually getting to good images, I promise. So here we go. Surgery is also something that has to be sold because it is, of course, invasive, and we have to create a climate where it's normal. So I picked just a few examples of television shows that revolve around cosmetic surgery industry. There are many more one could include. There are many from Latin America. And of course, I didn't even include all the shows that have special topics on cosmetic surgery, all the kinds of talk shows that focus on surgeries and stuff. But it's mainstreamed in the culture so that it's no longer seen as a huge medical risk or an unnecessary expense or increased medical intervention. Now, Now, part of how I'm arguing that this works, this the discourse of the new global beauty, is that it pulls more people in, and it's seductive in that way. So that if I feel like I'm sort of a part of the new global beauty, then I'm less likely to reject the whole thing outright. But I'm going to argue that, this inclusion is actually an illusion and not real. Here are some examples of our inclusive global beauty. You probably recognize all of these famous faces. These are all women of color: Aishwarya Rai, Jennifer Lopez, Halle Berry, and Beyonce. And you can see when looking at them, must sort of step back, that there is something about each of them that reinforces the ideology of white beauty. Long hair, blonde highlights, Anglo-facial features, etc. In fact, some of you, if you're blogosphere types, might recognize this ad, which caused Beyonce a huge controversy, because this is a L'Oreal ad for hair color, and L'Oreal was accused by the public of lightening Beyonce's skin tone in this ad. As you notice, she looks a little lighter than usual in that ad. And they vehemently denied those accusations, but this ad was pulled. It's actually really hard to find its image online, so I had to download it quickly before it disappeared. But I think it's very interesting that they're being accused of that, whether or not they actually did it. People have the perception that Beyonce is looking lighter and lighter in all of her public appearances. So I'm arguing that this is an illusion of inclusion. You can feel like you're included if you see a woman who's of your group, sort of in this elite group of celebrities and supermodels and stuff. So it's enough to keep you purchasing the products that they endorse and that kind of thing, instead of rejecting the beauty industry outright. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you know how many, of those 4 particular women, if any of them have actually had plastic surgery, or
I don't
what
know.
they've had done?
I don't. You know how people are. They don't. In the United States, they don't like to always reveal that. So I'm not sure. Other people may know. Do you know?
A friend of mine told me for what this is worth. He had an aunt who was involved in plastic surgery on Beyonce.
Oh, interesting.
For what that's worth.
For what it's worth.
Secondhand. Swear to me.
But I think, what's interesting is, even if they didn't, they represent the kind of work people want done. You know what I mean? So even if their noses are real, people say, I want that nose. I want a Aishwarya nose or eyes or whatever. I'm sure you could probably buy contacts in the Aishwarya Rai color if you wanted, that color of eyes. This is an ad. It's sort of in a similar vein. I titled this "Black and Brown Beauties. Now you see them, now you don't." You might not recognize. This is Tyra Banks, okay? But see, the way this ad is constructed, it's like these women are all sort of the same, right? And they're there sort of in this array of faces, and they're supposed to be selling natural kind of beauty for every kind of skin. So this is supposed to be an ad of global beauty, inclusion, multiculturalism, but again, the message is that the beauty is actually very similar. And Tyra sort of blends in with these other women who are mostly white, but I'm not sure, maybe Latina, it's hard to tell. But this ad kind of gets at exactly what I'm talking about, this illusion of inclusion. This is an ad for a beauty salon in Taipei. Okay, so talking about globalizing white beauty everywhere, even where white women are a minority. I'm going to wrap up here because I know I've been talking for a long time. But I wanted to talk briefly about skin bleaching, skin bleachers, brighteners, whiteners, and lighteners. I could add on fading gels, evening creams, etc. They're marketed under all kinds of names, and this is a huge, huge industry. Okay, Bio White, Blanc Expert, porcelain skin whitening cream. This is my favorite, Nubian Light. And this is a Sekisei product, which is the most expensive of the group here, $40 for 40 grams. So whitening creams are everywhere. They are a huge global industry. Some of them are manufactured from small outfits. Some of them are parts of major companies like L'Oreal, for example. So they're everywhere, and there's a growing global concern about their safety. And yet, like cosmetic surgery, they become increasingly popular, particularly outside of the United States and in the global South. Many nations, particularly in the Caribbean and the continent of Africa, are working toward banning skin bleaching creams. Ghana and Zimbabwe have already banned them. Jamaica keeps trying and not quite making it. But there's a lot of pushback against this move towards skin bleaching, particularly in post-colonial nations where there's a lot of concern that this is a sort of valorization of whiteness or of legacy of colonialism. But one of the things that I want to highlight is that the choice to use skin bleaching creams, despite the fact that some are quite dangerous, the choice to use them isn't a crazy choice. It is, in a sense, a rational choice in the sense that people are responding to what they see as real benefits from light skin, from anglo-facial features, etc. So I don't want to give the impression that people who choose to have cosmetic procedures done or choose to use skin bleaching creams are somehow pathological. In fact, they're being quite rational in the sense that they're making decisions to try to maximize their employability, their marriageability, etc. So those are real things that they are responding to, even if the potential risks are relatively high. Okay. And finally, the U.S. Is both a producer and a consumer in this skin bleaching complex. And they're a producer of the products themselves, so it's a lot of American companies that make these products that are sold abroad. But they're also a producer of these cultural images, these images of white beauty and white heroism that go around the globe. So we're deeply implicated in that way. But we're also consumers of these products, of the skin evening cream, skin fading gels, skin brighteners, and all of those ways. So we both produce and consume in this country. Finally, several of you will remember or are still aware of the Dove campaign for real beauty, and many of us found it kind of interesting and a little bit refreshing, even if we were cautious about our interpretation of it. It's an interesting campaign, and in this particular ad, it says, "Firming the thighs of a size 2 supermodel is no challenge. Real women have real bodies with real curves, and Dove wants to celebrate those curves." So, of course, this is for a firming lotion, because firming the lotion of, I suppose, a size 10 woman is more of a challenge, but Dove is up to the challenge. And so this ad is both sort of a celebration of real women, yet still selling you a cream to make your real curves a little bit better or more presentable. But while this ad campaign is very popular in the United States and lots of people have paid attention to it, what's interesting is that the parent company is Unilever, and they send a completely different message on the other side of the world, and that Unilever is also the company that makes Fair & Lovely cream in India and the now new Fair & Handsome marketed for men, a skin lightening cream marketed for men. So again, I said that it was the illusion of inclusion again, because on the one hand, it seems like a sort of progressive move to have this campaign for real beauty, but the same company, because they can sell it, is selling whiteness on the other side of the globe. So it's an ongoing challenge to kind of bring these things together. Finally, this is the last slide, I promise. I end with L'Oreal's White Perfect product. And I just conclude by saying that light skin and Anglo features provide high status in both material and symbolic ways. that light skin and angle features operate as social and symbolic capital, as I mentioned in the beginning, and that importantly here, women's bodies, particularly women of color's bodies, are really seen as manipulable commodities in an increasingly global marketplace. Thanks.
Well,